you for joining us again for another episode of Lackawanna Pastimes. Today we're looking at a bit of an outdoorsy topic. We're looking at the history of the Archbald Pothole and the Lackawanna State Park. We're joined by Tony DeSantis, who is the Environmental Education Specialist for the Lackawanna State Park Complex. Tony graduated from Lock Haven University in 2006 with a degree in outdoor recreation management and has worked in several state park systems since then, before returning to Pennsylvania and joining DCNR in 2017. Originally from Scranton, Tony currently resides in Clark Summit with his wife and two cats. Tony, I'll turn the program over to you to talk about some of our local parks in the area.
Good. Well, thank you for having me and having me part of this webinar series. I'm just going to share my screen to pull everything up. So I'll just minimize this. All right. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to be speaking to you all today. And thank you for willing to spend a portion of your afternoon with me. Again, my name is Tony DeSantis. I'm the environmental educator with the Lackawanna State Park Complex. And before I get into these, what I call historical briefs of these two local state parks, I would like to lay down a really thin foundation of what the state park system is all about. So if you would humor me and just take a moment to read over this very short passage and think about where this might originate from. And I don't know if folks have their audio on, but you're welcome to share what you think into the microphone. Any thoughts?
I have been muting people, so if anybody wants to
okay,
that's
fine. That's fine.
Yeah, please unmute yourselves as you're going. But to me, it sounds like Teddy Roosevelt and Gifford
I was just going to say that, but he didn't live here.
So this passage, these three sentences, make up Article 1, Section 27 of the Pennsylvania Constitution. And this serves as a really strong backbone of what the state park system in our Pennsylvania is all about. We provide a nice portion of that common property for all the people to utilize, including future generations. We strive to preserve those various aspects of the environment, and we maintain them on your behalf. So what does our share of the common property look like? Well, on this map, you could count 124 little pine tree icons, each representing a state park unit. And this represents about over 300,000 acres of land, of state park property. And these 124 units make up the Bureau of State Parks. We're one of 6 bureaus within the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, or DCNR. And the state park's mission is to provide opportunities for enjoying healthful outdoor recreation and to serve as outdoor classrooms for environmental education. That is literally what I'm in charge of here at the park, outdoor and environmental education. So we have a pretty extensive system. Now, keep in mind, some parks have very extravagant facilities. Some are quite primitive or rustic, so they weren't created equally. But regardless of the extent of development at that park, that open land is yours to use and to enjoy. So let me now focus as to where I'm working out of. So I work at a complex, and as a complex, we oversee multiple park units. So for us, we manage Salt Spring State Park in northern Susquehanna County. We manage Prompton State Park in Wayne County, Archbald Pothole in the Valley, and our main unit, and where I'm currently sitting, Lackawanna State Park here in the Abingtons. And it's these last two park units, which will be our discussion today, Lackawanna and Archbald Pothole. So, being that I imagine everyone's a history buff, whenever you talk about history, you have to figure out, where do you want to begin your story? How far back in time do you want to begin? And I'm willing to assume you're all familiar with the fact that the Americas, prior to European colonization, was home to a large number of diverse cultures, and EPA is no different. So where our parks are currently located, we would have been in the historic range of the Susquehannock people. as well as the Munsee-speaking Lenape people. Unfortunately, at neither park do we have direct evidence of these peoples, so I don't have relevant information about that history of our land. Also, out of respect for them, I'm not going to be speaking on their behalf. That's a story for to be told by the proper voices, and I'm not that proper voice. So let's talk about other aspects of land use for the places that became these two state parks. And we will start with the one in the upper Wyoming Valley, Archbald Pothole. So going back in time, we're going to go ahead way back to the most recent glacier event for North America, known as the Wisconsin glaciation. It started about 75,000 years ago, wrapped up about 11,000 years ago. And this image here shows a Laurentide ice sheet at its maximum extent, which occurred about 18,500 years ago. And I have northeastern Pennsylvania indicated with that green triangle there. We were under ice. How much ice? It's estimated between 1,500 and 2,000 feet of ice during the ice sheet maximum, which is just baffling to even think about. Quebec, Canada was under 2 miles of ice. So just an extreme situation to if we would have found ourselves in that environment. So this ice sheet, not a glacier, but an ice sheet, was encompassing northern North America, including our area. And shortly after the maximum, about 15,000 to 13,000 years ago, that brings us to the origin of the Archbald Pothole. And the most suggested or accepted hypothesis is the following. So during the warmer months, sunlight would melt the very uppermost layer of the ice, get some thaw happening, get some water moving, and these little trickles would form small streams that would join other streams. And for one stream that was flowing over present-day Einan, it encountered a crevice that allowed it to cascade all the way down to the bedrock beneath the ice. And as it's falling several hundred feet, it's gaining energy. And once it impacts that bedrock, it begins to erode that stone. And as it's picking up those rock fragments, it's including it in the whirling movement of the water. So as the rock fragments are swirling and bumping each other, they start carving the bedrock, making it deeper and larger over time. It went through 3 different layers of stone. The uppermost was sandstone. Then it encountered a layer of shale. And then before it ceased working and digging out this hole, it encountered the layer of anthracite coal, which is kind of our leads back to our industrial lineage here in northeastern Pennsylvania. As the ice age began to recede, so did that ice sheet, and eventually that pothole was uncovered. However, it was filled. So all the stones that were used to excavate that pothole, think of it as a stone polisher. We have all these rounded cobblestones. They now filled the pothole. So for the next 11,000 years ago, this pothole remained pretty much hidden from view until 1884. At this point, coal mining is occurring throughout the Wyoming Valley, and deep underground in the area of Einan is a 17-year-old miner. His name was Patrick Mahan. I'm not sure where the emphasis is on it with the syllables, but he's employed by Jones Simpson and Company as a miner, 17 years old, and he's hard at work extending a mine shaft adjacent to present-day Route 6 in Einan. And he places some explosives, he lights them off, but instead of the shaft extending further, an unexpected rush of water and cobble and stones fall from the ceiling. So this is not good, right? So Patrick and other miners in the area flee the site, fearing for their lives. The incident is then reported to Edward Jones. Edward Jones of Jones, Simpson and Company. He's one of the managers. He investigates the incident and he's baffled. According to the maps, according to the survey work, nothing should have happened. There shouldn't have been that extra risk of mining in that area. So he ordered the area to be cleared of debris. He wants to get to the bottom of it, literally and figuratively. And between 800 and 1,000 tons, not pounds, but tons of small rounded stones are removed. And Mr. Jones then realizes that this is a vertical tunnel, i.e. a natural pothole that they encountered. So now what? What do we do with this big hole coming from the surface into our mine? Well, they decide to use it as a ventilation shaft. So for the next few years, they have a large fire burning at the bottom. This is drawing air through the tunnels, through the shafts, expelling the dangerous toxic air and allowing fresh air to come in from the entrances and other nearby air shafts. So here we can see the excavated pothole, including some of those remaining cobblestones that would have filled the entire hole. And I'm told that as the miners would find these stones in the pothole and around, they would actually give them out to people. So there might be folks in the area that might have some of these stones in their attics or basements still. If anyone knows of one, let me know. I'd love to get an image of one. So in terms of excavated potholes, this is said to be the world's largest. It measures 38 feet deep. At its widest diameter, it's 42 feet by 24 feet across. So it's elliptical in shape. And this is big enough to hold 140,000 gallons of water. So you would need about 35 water tankers to fill it up. So it's a massive pool. Is it the world's biggest? That is debatable. There is speculation there are bigger ones in Antarctica, and the mining company did encounter another pothole about 1,000 feet to the northeast that they surmise is bigger. They estimated it to be about 50 feet deep. However, it was never excavated, so it's still filled with cobble. It is on private property, so access to it is going to be quite limited moving forward. So there could be bigger ones out there, but this Archbald pothole is certainly one of the biggest, if not the biggest excavated. You'll notice in this image of the pothole, and this is shortly after they kind of near the completion of removing out a cobble, look how smooth those walls are. Much different than it is today, since it's been exposed to the elements and vegetation is now growing on the sides. This was polished very smooth by those thousands upon thousands of rocks spinning around like in a whirlpool. So, not long after its discovery, the site was sought after less for that natural functioning chimney and more for its appeal as a geological wonder. In 1887, the landowner went ahead and he furnished 500 of his own dollars. His name was Colonel Hackley, and he built a fence around the hole, and he built a stone retaining wall. The coal mining company did offer to buy the property, but Hackley declined and kept it to himself. However, he did allow people to visit. One of those people I mentioned earlier, Edward Jones, the coal mine manager, he actually gave tours to the site for residents, to visitors, and to noted geologists, thus propelling it as a popular tourist attraction here in our area. So this image here, the caption is going to the pothole in 1887. So this is literally a train of people making their way to Einan just to see this geological wonder. In this image, you can see that stone retaining wall around the edge of the hole. Some of it is still visible if you go visit a pothole today. In 1914, after the passing of Colonel Hackley, his widow donated the site as well as another acre containing the pothole to, you guessed it, the Lackawanna Historical Society. So this was part of your program's amenities and facilities. 26 years later, in 1940, the site then was transferred to Lackawanna County Park System. In addition to that acre of land that was originally deeded to the Historical Society, an additional 150 acres of land was included for the park itself. And I'm not sure what the reason was behind that transfer. So if anyone knows, by all means, feel free to pass it along my way. 21 years later, it went from being a county park to being a Pennsylvania state park. So in the mid 50s, and I'll get into this a little bit deeper in a few moments, the state was making a strive to increase their number of state parks. So in 1959, as we see in this news clipping, they reached out to Lackawanna County to see, hey, would you mind giving us this as a park for our state park system? In 1961, that transfer occurred. Improvements were conducted in the site. This platform was made so you could look down into the pothole, and it was dedicated and open to the public in 1964. And this is an image from that dedication. And here we see a family or a couple of families using that platform to look down into that pothole. Now, Archbald Pothole was a massive tourist attraction in our area. I mentioned one of you saying each Sunday you would go out for picnics, and the Archbald Pothole was a destination. You are not alone. I've seen images from the 50s just jam-packed with vehicles and people enjoying the site. Unfortunately, that throng of people visiting the pothole did not last forever. Visitation began to drop, and usually when visitation drops, that means neglect begins to set in. This park was no different. So it started seeing vandalism, it started seeing maintenance issues. But fortunately, a local representative had the foresight in this park to want to push for some improvements. So State Representative Ed Stayback, he pushed to revitalize Archbald Pothole, and his push was to provide funds to spruce up the park around the pothole. And that was in 1993. The park was rededicated in 1997 after new landscaping and new parking area, removal of old facilities. At one time, there were restrooms at this park. They were removed during that process due to being too far gone. In addition to revitalizing the park, the pothole itself, there were also funds used to reclaim the area of land beyond the pothole. Remember, this is 150 acres, not just that 1 acre the pothole is situated on. And the additional 150 acres were abandoned strip mining lands. So money went towards reclaiming those lands, removing the comb piles from the previous and historical industry, filling in those strip pits, and in the early 2000s, creating recreational fields, trail system, tennis courts, basketball courts, and creating what is known as Ed Stayback Regional Park. So Ed Stayback Regional Park does sit on state park land, but we have an agreement with the borough of Archbald where this is their park and they manage it as their entity. So this is a good example of local and state government park systems working together. Today, we would consider Archbald Pothole as one of the primitive state parks I referred to earlier. It has parking facilities. It has an informational kiosk. It has that viewing platform, but that's about it. We don't have other facilities or visitor center or offices located at the park. The other side of the park, the eastern end of it, is still continues to be Ed Stabak Regional Park. We're still in agreement with the borough to keep that open and keep that maintained. Now we are getting closer to winter, so I will mention that if you want to go visit either side of the park, whether the Pothole side or the Ed Stabak side, just keep in mind the parks are gated for the winter due to the lack of road clearing ability, but you can certainly walk in and visit those sites. So that's a brief history of Archbald Pothole State Park. And now I'll transition into a brief history of Lackawanna State Park. And the same thing, where do I begin? Well, let me begin with this map. This is a map of Luzerne County from 1792. And you probably noticed already, but before 1898, where's my notes? 1878, we were part of Luzerne County until we split. And at this time, northeastern Pennsylvania is kind of disputed between the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the state of Connecticut. So it's kind of a lot of angst and conflict being held in this area. So if we look at this map, well, we could see some names that should be familiar to you. Kingston, Exeter, Nicholson's located. We can make out the Taconic Creek. We have a different spelling of the Lackawanna River, Lackawanna Creek. But we don't see much in terms of the Abingtons. In fact, I can show you where Lackawanna State Park currently sits by following the south branch of the Tunkhannock Creek, and it would be right between the S and the H of Township, right there where that green triangle is. So at this time, not much is happening, at least permanently, in the Abingtons. The first settler who happened to set up a log cabin right here in the park was Mr. Ezra Bassett in 1805. He built a log cabin in the northern end of Lackawanna State Park, which is now underwater since we created a reservoir. And that area was historically known as Prickly Ash Flats, named for a small tree, which is very uncommon anymore. We have only a few individuals left. Shortly after Ezra settled here, other folks started to move in, including Ezra Wall 20 years later. He established the very first Stagecoach Tavern, more or less where Route 438 and 407 intersect. He also opened up the first store and post office several years later. And what really helped to settle this area was the completion of the Philadelphia and Great Bend Turnpike. So this turnpike was basically an improvement of a section of trails known as the Lackawanna Trails. These are a series or network of paths connecting the Lackawanna Valley to present-day New York. And this was developed to attract settlers to the frontier, rural Pennsylvania. And it helped. Shortly after, a blacksmith shop was set up locally. A wheelwright shop was set up locally by other settlers. So if we fast forward to about 38 years later, I could show you a map from 1864. And with this map, I overlay the boundary of Lackawanna State Park to give you an idea of the scale. We can see the town of Wallsville. So this was created around Ezra Wall's first development and was named in honor of him. We have a lot of people living and farming in the area. If you look closely, you're going to find stores and shops. You're going to find a post office, schools, a church, cemetery, grist mills, and sawmills, especially since we have States Creek and Kennedy Creek, which are now known as States and Kennedy Creek. At the time, they're well, that refers to families that lived along those creeks. So a lot is happening in what is now Lackawanna State Park. A lot of people living, farming, and working, as well as learning and worshiping. But the neat thing is, this site has a history of recreation prior to the park being even conceived of. So if we go back to 1898, several area farmers came together and organized what would be known as the Maitland Fair and Driving Park Association. And they held horse races in an area that is now Lackawanna State Park. They had a grandstand, they have facilities built, and eventually this would evolve into the annual Lackawanna County Fair. So this weird image I'm showing you, this is LiDAR. This is showing a portion of the park below our campground. And to give you some orientation, 407 is moving left or right. So Waverly would be towards the right, Fleetville towards the left. And then we see Route 48 intersecting it. La Plume would be down on the image. I-81 would be up. If you look closely, you might be able to make out this very faint oval in the middle of the screen. And if you can't see it, I'll help you out. There it is. So that is the imprint of that horse track. So that still remains today. If you were to go visit the site now, you'll notice a portion of it is paved as an access road. You can actually make out the upper straightaway, the one closest to 407. A portion of it also serves as one of our hiking trails. And here is a flyer I found from the book Bailey Hollow, A History of Dalton, which is advertising the Maitland Fair Driving Park Company and Association for the 1900 Lackawanna County Fair. So if you ever came to Lackawanna State Park and camped here, you would have been camping on what is known as Fairground Hill, named for the fairground. So that brings us up to 1910. Around 1910, the county fair was moved to Glenburn, closer to Clark Summit, and things kind of wrapped up in what was known as Wallsville. But there's still a lot of things moving that will bring us now to how Lackawanna State Park came to be. And like most things in northeastern Pennsylvania, especially the Scranton area, it begins with railroads and coal. And around 1912, 1913, we have a feud occurring between the Scranton Gas and Water Company and the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad. The railroad is utilizing steam locomotives, and they need two natural resources, coal and water. Coal is heated in the on the train. It's used to boil the water into steam. That steam is pressurized to use to move the pistons of the wheels. Well, the railroad felt that the water company wasn't giving them a good deal. They felt like they're being overcharged. So how do we fix this? Well, they decided, let's cut out the middleman. We'll build our own reservoir, have our own water supply, save some money, and not worry about the water company anymore. So in 1913, they sent agents to purchase up farms that were located along States Creek in North Abington and Benton townships. So here in this image, this is an image from Google Earth. You can see the southern end of the park and States Creek flowing into what is now Lackawanna Lake. So before the lake was even here, they already conceived the idea of creating a reservoir, not for recreation, but for industrial purposes. The agents purchased 13 farms. And at that point, the water company had a change of heart. They saw their bluff called. They didn't want to lose a big customer like the railroad. So they lowered their rates. Everyone was happy, but the railroad still owned this land. So at this point, they rented the land to tenant farmers to continue farming in the area. Now, 33 years later, along comes a prominent person from Scranton, Robert Moffett, owner of coal mining businesses. And for some reason, I'm not certain why. So if anyone can fill me in on that gap, I'd be appreciating of that information. He buys up the railroad's land and then rents it out to coal miners and their families. So it transitioned from the railroad now to Robert Moffett and his coal mining operations. So that'll bring us up to present day, and we're going to move up into the mid 50s. So in 1955, we're going to head down to Harrisburg for a moment. We are introduced to Dr. Maurice Goddard. Dr. Goddard is overseeing and directing the predecessor of what would become DCNR. It was known as the Department of Forest and Waters. He began his tenure in 1955 to 1979, and he had a very progressive vision for Pennsylvania. He believed that if you were living in Pennsylvania or visiting, you should be within 25 miles of a state park. That way, the hassle of driving, the burden of fuel wasn't overwhelming enough for you to access your state parks. So during those 24 years that he was overseeing the department, he would end up adding 45 parks to the system, including Archbald Pothole, and that would account for about 130,000 acres. Now, in order to do this, you need money, and you need lots of money, and he recognized the fact that he needed to act fast. Remember, we're in the 50s, so there's a lot of suburbia occurring. There's a lot of development in terms of industrialization. The interstate highway system is being constructed, as well as secondary roads. So he needs to get onto that open land and protect it before it's utilized by other uses. So in order to do this, in 1961, the Land Acquisition and Borrowing Act is proposed, and this would enable funding to purchase lands for public parks, reservoirs, conservation, and recreation areas in Pennsylvania. This act is dubbed Project 70. 70 referring to a couple things. One, they were seeking $70 million through bonds. Two, 1970 was chosen as a target year to complete all of this acquisition of necessary open space in Pennsylvania. And three, 1970 also coincided with the anticipated completion of the Keystone Shortway, or I-80. This act was a massive deal because this would require an amendment to our state constitution in order to issue out a $70 million bond. So it had three hurdles it had to pass. The first was it had to pass a state legislature. The second was it had to pass a state legislature again following election. So it had to pass two separate houses and senates. The third was it had to be voted on by the people of Pennsylvania. It passed all three measures. So on June 2nd, 1964, it was written into law under Governor Scranton. Now, this all sounds great for conservation, but it did allow for eminent domain, which allows the state to take private property for use as public land. So it forced landowners to sell their land in some cases. So quite a touchy and sore subject if you're that landowner. Okay, so Maurice Goddard has his funds. Of that $70 million, $40 million is earmarked for state parks. And a public meeting is held locally in January of 1966 to establish a state park around the Scranton metropolitan area, since we are an urban area with a large population. So where should we put it? How about the place that the railroad already surveyed for their reservoir? Because if you look back at the 60s and 70s of state parks, every park had to have a lake. So tons and tons of reservoirs were created. All right, let's do that. So 2 months later, March 66, the governor signs off on the plan, and we have what is initially called Tunkhannock State Park, named after the south branch of the Tunkhannock Creek flowing through the site. Okay, so we have money to buy the land, but we need money to develop the land as well as to administer a park. So in 1967, we have Project 500. This is another bond issue, has to pass all three hurdles. And if you got the gist of what Project 70 was about in terms of its name, Project 500 was seeking $500 million as a bond. Now, not all of that went to state parks, only 125 million. The rest of it, or a lot of it, went to mine reclamation for the statewide strip mining areas and where habitat need to be approved. So both bond measures pass. We have this pot of money. We have approval to forge ahead. And in 1968, Robert Moffett, his land is purchased by the state, as well as other landowners, and development begins. And here we see one of the original proposed plans for the park. This is a massive board. It's about 6 feet tall, hangs on the wall of my manager's office. So to help you see it a little bit clearer, I'll turn it to its side so it's slightly enlarged. With any park plan, there's always grandiose ideas that are thrown out there. But then usually once you start getting the ball rolling, you realize we don't have that kind of money, or it's not practical. Same thing at Lackawanna State Park. So let me show you some of the things that never came to be here at the park. First off, why have one campground when you have 2 campgrounds, basically taking up the entire half of the park for a total of 458 camping sites, plus, for backpackers, a primitive camping area. Okay, we're going to have a reservoir, so let's have a beach. No, let's have 2 beaches. We'll have 2 beaches. Okay, let's have a beach. There'll be people boating on the lake, so let's make a marina for people to keep their boats at. Okay, I like this idea. What about people who want to use trails and go horseback riding? All right, let's have some stables. Let's have a horse pasture. Nice. Oh, you know, some of the land we purchased has not an old at the time, but has a small ski area. So let's have some skiing at Lackawanna State Park. And if you were able to see this, in quote, it says a possible small ski area. And this was land that I believe was Governor Scranton's ski slope. If I'm not mistaken, his land went to Marworth up on Lily Lake Road. I could be mistaken about that, though. In addition to those recreational facilities, we're going to have a museum. And where do we have everyone park? I know. Well, let's have 2,025 parking spots throughout the park. How do I know it's 2,025? Because they have parking areas delineated on a map, and they estimated how much each one would hold. I went around and counted and added them all up to over 2,000 parking spots. So again, grandiose ideas that just never came to be. So what did happen? How did the park develop? Well, as I mentioned, 50s, 60s, 70s, if you had a state park, you had to have a large body of water. So we had to construct a dam to create a reservoir. This construction consisted of clearing the land. So they had to fell all the trees, otherwise they would have been bobbing in the lake. And we had to create an earthen dam to back up the south branch of the Tunkhannock Creek, as well as the tributaries to it within the park property, States Creek, Kennedy Creek, and Whites Creek. Now, at the time, there was a bridge crossing the south branch of the Tunkhannock Creek. So we're going to flood that bridge. We need to make a higher bridge. So this is the bridge that we now cross when we go over the lake on 407. The old bridge is still underwater. Here we see construction of the earthen dam. This is the lakeside face of the dam. We see the water control structure there in the middle. The reservoir was built strictly for recreational purposes. It did not provide any drinking water or flood control measures. Here we see the outlet side of the dam. So you notice they had to blast away the side of the hill to create the spillway so that the water level would only get so high before it went over the lip. This is our original park office. This building still stands. It's off of 524. It is now our ranger station. So our law enforcement officers utilize it. Our new office is on 407. We would need a maintenance facility. So this is the original maintenance building. That still stands. However, it's been added on to, and there's a few more buildings in that area, also off of 524. If we're going to have camping, that means we're going to have bathhouses, we're going to have a lot of restrooms. So we need to treat that wastewater. So we have a wastewater treatment plant here at the park. It's still in use today. We have a wastewater treatment operator on staff, and that sits off of Austin Road, so near the spillway. Of course, we need parking. Now, we don't have enough parking for 2,025 cars in the park, but we have plenty of parking for our day use area. So this is looking at lot number 3. And here we see from lot number 3 looking towards lot number 4 and kind of the eastern end of our day use area. You notice the stone walls were constructed. If you visit the area now, you'll notice most of the stone walls are a lot shorter or even missing altogether. And this is another angle from that same vantage point. Here we're looking towards what would become the lake. You can see how the area has been cleared behind that structure there. And that structure still stands. That serves as our boat rental concession building. Here we see construction of the original pool, which was circular in shape, was deeper in the middle. Now, you might think, okay, if you're building a lake, why not just have a beach? In fact, the original plans called for 2. Well, unfortunately, when they started to test the waters of the creek and started investigating very high bacteria counts, what I'm told anyway, is they discovered there's a slaughterhouse or a butcher shop upstream that would regularly discard waste directly into the creek, and that would flow downstream into what would become Lackawanna State Park. And to have people swimming in that kind of environment would not be healthy nor make anyone happy. So a pool was developed. And 4 years later, in 1972, the park was officially opened to the public. So here we have an aerial image from it's certainly post 1975. We're looking at the pool. This is our day use area. So looking from right to left, I see parking lots number 2, 3, 4, and 5. Here's a little closer vantage point of it. See that pool complex nicely. And all of this is very familiar today. The pool complex has been updated. It was redone about 10 years ago. We've added some other facilities like pavilions and restrooms, but more or less, this is what the park looks like today. And another thing that looks very similar is this image of a school group meeting that mission statement of state parks, using parks as an educational and outdoor classroom. Well, this is what I do regularly, so I'm quite familiar with this scene here. So today, that earthen dam backs up the waters of the south branch of the Tunkhannock Creek. We have a 198-acre reservoir. It's about 34 feet deep in front of the dam. Again, strictly for recreational purposes. Fishing and boating is very popular here. We allow electric motors only. So this gentleman with his boat would have the gasoline motor off in the back and just using the trolling motor up front. And here we see the spillway, which some people come up to me and ask, where's the waterfalls? This is what they're referring to, but it's just a spillway that has a bit of a natural aesthetic to it. And this water continues down the south branch of the Tunkhannock Creek, goes through La Plume, makes its way to the main Tunkhannock Creek, where it joins into the Susquehanna River in the town of Tunkhannock, and ultimately flows into the Chesapeake Bay. In terms of facilities, especially with camping, no, we don't have 458 campsites. That would be a small town. We have a manageable 120 sites, all located on Fairground Hill along Fairground Road. So that concludes my talk and kind of historical briefs of these two parks. So hopefully you're eager to get out and explore them. And I'm happy to take any questions you have, as long as you realize my little disclaimer that I gave it. I don't know much more than I already said, so there might be some questions I'm going to have to jot down and look for the answer, and then reach back out to you all with proper answers. But I certainly thank you all for joining me this afternoon, and hopefully I'll see you at our state parks.
All right, thanks very much, Tony. That was great information. The map of the map with the original state park was wild. Why should there not be two beaches and a horse pasture? Somebody's dog is unhappy. I'm going to shut off your screen sharing.
Okay.
For a minute here, I have one show and tell thing myself that I wanted to share. You mentioned we were talking about the Archbald Pothole, about the round rocks that were unearthed from there. The Historical Society actually has them in our collection.
Oh, neat.
I think how I suspect that the storyline worked out. There it is. Can everybody can see that? This is cool. It's on display on the second floor in the Catlin House. The rock itself is not perfectly round; it's sort of squashed a little bit, but it's not unlike any sort of rock you would just regularly dig out of your yard.
Certainly not a natural forming rock.
No, definitely not. Definitely something that's been tumbled around for quite some time. It's our director, Marianne Savikinis, is from Archbald, so the pothole is one of her favorite things in our collection. But it was donated to the Historical Society in 1914. The society had been founded in 1886 as Lackawanna Institute of History and Science. Our early members were into archaeology. There was Horace Hollister's art collection of indigenous artifacts. We did a lot of natural history. But however, in 1920, the society changed its name to the Lackawanna Historical Society and started to kind of get away from the natural history and into more regular indoor history.
Nice.
So I suspect that's why then, it was too much. It didn't really fit the mission anymore to hold a state park, a natural park. So that's why it was transferred to the county.
Okay, that makes sense. And I did see
Marianne
references.
and I are not outdoorsy people. So we're, as much as we like the pothole, we're glad it's in better hands now than ours.
And I did see reference to that original name and some resource. So I'm glad you clarified that. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think that's how the shift happened from the mining company to the Historical Society to the county and the state.
That makes sense.
So there's a little more information there. Does anyone have any questions for Tony or any other stories about your experience?
Or thoughts, or gaps.
The state park.
Yeah, if you identified a gap of information, or by all means, feel free to chime in and add your knowledge. I always tell people this is a living document. So as I learn new facts, it grows. So
yeah, we're learning new stories every day.
That's right.
Hi, Tony. It's Wes. I actually visited the cemetery, the Wellsville Cemetery there. What's his name? The guy who actually started this Scranton School for the Deaf is actually buried in there.
Yeah. Well, now that you asked me, I can't remember his Koppler.
Something like that.
Yes. Now that you mentioned it, I can't think of. But yes, he's buried there. He married into the Hopfer family, who's buried there as well. So yeah. Historically, there was another cemetery where that the lake claimed. So those sites were moved. I believe they went to Dalton, I think I was told, but I could be mistaken on that. So there was a church where Wallsville Cemetery is, and that cemetery was part of that church. Yeah.
Are they planning on putting like a historical marker there or anything?
There was plans years ago to honor. I can't remember his name. The founder of the Scranton School of the Deaf. So the plan was to put it there. However, it was then decided to put it at the school itself in Scranton, the original school. So yeah, we don't have a marker there. Whether or not we get one in the future, that would be a good interpretive piece. So I think that's something we could certainly look at in the future, and as an educational person here, something I could put on my to-do list.
Absolutely. Now, the colonel that actually originally owned the Scranton Pothole, whatever it became of him?
Hackley. All I know is he passed away in 1914 or thereabouts. I'm not sure his story beyond that. It might be written in some resources I have, but I'll have to do some digging. So I'm going to write a note to do so.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the great questions.
I don't know much about him either. Anybody else? No? All right. Well, again, Tony, thanks very much for joining us.
I was just going
This
to
is
share.
a story that's one of our favorites that we never talk much about. I'm sorry, Jack, did you have something to add?
Actually, I was just going to share. I grew up next to the Lackawanna State Park and when it was being built, and I can remember in elementary school when it was shut down. And growing up in front of our house, we were on 407, just about a mile and a half from it. You could go 5 minutes between cars going past your house.
Okay.
Until the park opened up. And then it changed. But I remember it being built, and we did a field trip when it first opened up to the park. My mother, up until the early 90s, used to walk her dog most of the days of the week in the park.
Nice.
Everybody knew her because she was this 91-year-old lady who would walk her dog in the park.
Nice.
Very nice.
That's great. Yeah, I hear stories like that all the time of seeing it open. My father, in fact, he tells me he remembers when it was opened, and he remembers. He tells me he remembers in the 90s when they drew down the lake. So we have that water control structure there in case we need maintenance on the dam or other issues, and we had to do maintenance in the dam in the 90s. And he remembers it drew down the lake, and people came out to walk out and on the old road and the old bridge. But fortunately for me, I grew up in this park myself. I learned how to ride my bike and fish here. So to come back after working in other states and their state park systems is kind of a nice way to connect the dots for me. Thanks for sharing that, Jack. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks very much, Tony, for joining us, for sharing your information, especially that really great map of the original plan for the park. It was wonderful to see resources like that and learn a little bit more about natural history, which is something that we don't often talk about anymore, although it was originally in our initial mission for the Historical Society. Our next episode coming up in October, we'll be celebrating Family History Month with LHS member Nancy Gilbride Casey, who'll be talking about her process and her journey, her genealogical journey for doing her family history and her research. She currently lives in Texas, so she's talking about how she reconnected with her Pennsylvania roots. We work with a lot of historians and genealogists, so it's great to let them spotlight some of their stories and what they find as they're working. That'll be our October program with Nancy Casey looking at her own family history. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. If you have a time this weekend, please consider going to take a walk in the park. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a good night.